The story begins with Lady Garnet Fraser steps out of her carriage and into the imposing, silent atmosphere of an estate that feels far removed from the bustling vibrancy of the capital, marking the beginning of a new chapter in her life. She moves with the practiced grace of a high-born noblewoman, her expression composed as she navigates the corridors of the mansion where she is destined to meet the man known only as the ghost of her former fiancé. The air in the hallway is heavy, characterized not by the bustling activity of a typical noble household, but by a stark, unsettling quiet that seems to swallow the sound of her footsteps. As she proceeds deeper into the residence, she observes the back of a solitary figure walking ahead of her, a man dressed in the uniform of a servant, guiding her toward her destination. This singular attendant represents an anomaly that Garnet immediately catalogues. In a residence of this size, a retinue of staff should be visible, yet this man remains the only servant she has encountered since her arrival, painting a grim picture of the household's operations. The attendant halts before a set of doors, turning to address her with a polite but firm instruction, requesting that Lady Garnet wait for a brief moment before entering. Garnet acknowledges the request with a simple, dignified affirmation, her mind already racing to deconstruct the environment around her. The sparsity of the staff and the oppressive silence validate the whispering rumors she had heard in social circles. It appears true that the lord of this manor is treated with a distinct coldness, isolated and neglected in a way that is clearly out of the ordinary for a noble's mansion. The architecture itself seems to loom over the inhabitants, reinforcing the sense of alienation that permeates the ghost prince's domain. While she waits, Garnet's gaze drifts, and she catches sight of a figure through a window or open doorway, a man with light hair and a somber expression, gazing out into the drifting petals of the garden. This is His Highness, Prince Razulus, the man known as the Ghost Prince of the Imperial Palace, because he never shows himself in public. As she studies his profile, Garnet's internal calculus remains cold and pragmatic. She does not seek romance or warmth. She determines that it does not matter what kind of person he is fundamentally. Her criteria for this union are purely political and functional. As long as Prince Razulus retains the right of succession to the throne, he serves her purpose. She steels herself, affirming her resolve to proceed with this arrangement regardless of his reputation or the desolate nature of his existence. The moment of formal introduction arrives. The attendant's voice cuts through the silence, announcing the presence of His Royal Highness, the second prince, Prince Razulus. As the weight of the situation settles upon her, a fleeting, darker thought crosses Garnet's mind. She considers the timing and the nature of this assignment, wondering if this match is a form of revenge exacted upon her by those she left behind in the capital. She quickly dismisses the notion, telling herself that it couldn't be such a petty orchestration, though the doubt lingers at the edge of her consciousness. Despite the ambiguity of her circumstances, a fierce determination ignites within her. She silently vows that she will surely make this overlooked, ghostly prince into a king, transforming her exile into a path to power. The narrative then fractures, pulling back the veil of time to reveal the catalyst for Garnet's current predicament, a reversal drama that began with a public and humiliating confrontation. The scene shifts to a brightly lit, opulent hall, contrasting sharply with the gloom of Razulus's mansion. Here, Prince Narcissus, the first prince, stands dramatically, his face contorted with theatrical anguish and resolve. He shouts Garnet's name, Garnet Fraser, seizing the attention of everyone present. With a grand gesture, he declares that from this moment on, he is breaking off his engagement with her. The declaration hangs in the air, a shatterpoint for the future Garnet had been groomed to expect. Narcissus clutches his forehead, performing the role of a man torn apart by emotion, while a petite woman, Isabel, clings to his arm, looking up at him with feigned innocence and worry. Narcissus proclaims that he has known true love, and it was Isabel who taught him the meaning of that emotion. He continues his monologue, asserting that in order to answer her love honestly, he cannot continue his engagement to Garnet. Garnet stands opposite them, her face unreadable, devoid of the shock or hysteria Narcissus likely expected. In her mind, she notes with a weary resignation that she knew this day would eventually come. She watches the spectacle with a detached, analytical eye, observing the absurdity of Narcissus asking if he should be the one standing there, while the very foundation of their political alliance crumbles. Garnet's internal monologue reveals that she had long anticipated this betrayal. She acknowledges that the fact His Highness was able to find someone to love is, in a vacuum, a good thing, as kings are historically permitted to have concubines. However, her grievance lies not with the romance itself, but with the lack of decorum and political awareness displayed by the couple. She recalls watching Isabelle Barquette and Narcissus behaving openly and affectionately in public, completely disregarding Garnet, who was the queen-to-be. This lack of discretion was troubling to her, a violation of protocol that threatened the dignity of the crown. Garnet remembers warning both of them about their conduct, a warning that clearly fell on deaf ears. The memory intensifies, showing the couple immersed in their own world. Narcissus whispers promises to protect Isabel, to which she responds with delight, claiming she is happy. They operate under the delusion of true love, believing that their bond is like a fire that only grows stronger against the wind of opposition. Garnet observes this shared delusion, realizing that perhaps it is precisely because of this forbidden, dramatic narrative they have constructed that their infatuation has deepened. She watches them, realizing that logic and duty hold no sway over people intoxicated by their own romantic narrative. Returning to the moment of the annulment, Garnet braces herself for the inevitable fallout. She anticipates the next phase of this standard villainous script. She expects to be condemned for a crime she didn't commit or perhaps exiled from the kingdom entirely. She stiffens her posture, mentally preparing for the onslaught, challenging them silently to come at her. However, the blow she expects does not land. Instead, Narcissus's expression softens into one of condescending gratitude. He acknowledges that Garnet has been incredibly supportive of him throughout all these years. Garnet pauses, confused by this deviation from the expected script. Narcissus continues, delivering a line that is both a compliment and a dismissal. He expresses disappointment, not in her actions, but in the nature of their connection, stating that while it wasn't true love, he thinks of her like a sister. He thanks her for her long-standing devotion, misinterpreting her dutiful adherence to protocol as familial affection. The gathered crowd and Garnet herself are stunned by this turn of events. The shock is palpable as spectators whisper, "What did he say?" Then comes the decree that seals her fate and sets her on the path to the Ghost Prince. Narcissus announces that, in recognition of her loyalty, he will allow her engagement to be transferred to his brother, the second Prince Razulus. He frames this as a benevolence, ensuring that although the partner has changed, the ties between the royal family and the Fraser family will continue unbroken. Garnet processes this information rapidly. The mention of the Ghost Prince triggers a realization. She understands immediately that this is not merely the whim of a foolish prince but a calculated political maneuver orchestrated from higher up, specifically by Queen Elaine. Garnet deduces the true intent behind the benevolent transfer. The royal family is not honoring the Fraser family, they are trying to cut them off. By marrying her to the reclusive, powerless second prince, they effectively neutralize her family's influence without causing a diplomatic incident. Even a child knows that rejecting a royal engagement is impossible, regardless of the circumstances. She recalls the pervasive rumors that the second prince does not appear in public because he is sickly and frail. Weighing her options in the face of this political checkmate, Garnet makes a strategic decision. She realizes that resisting now would be futile. Instead, she chooses the path of survival. Understanding that one does not know when they will die, and recognizing that she lacks strong backing in this moment, she concludes that it is advantageous to be at the bottom and stay hidden. From the shadows, she can maneuver more safely than in the blinding spotlight of the throne meant for Narcissus. With a bow that hides her sharp, calculating eyes, she verbally accepts the decree. She thanks His Highness Narcissus for his kindness and generosity, playing the part of the grateful subject perfectly. Respectfully, she accepts the engagement to His Highness Razulus, sealing her destiny and setting the stage for her arrival at the silent, empty mansion where the Ghost Prince awaits. The cold reception at the Ghost Prince's estate back to the immediate aftermath of the engagement annulment, focusing on the explosive reaction of Garnet's family. The scene erupts with kinetic energy as a solitary figure bellows into the night, refusing to accept the grim reality of the situation. Serge Frisier, Garnet's brother, declares with vehement intensity that he will absolutely not allow matters to end in such a disgraceful manner, his shout piercing the silence. He screams, "Never!" with enough force to shake the very atmosphere. The setting is the Frisier Villa in the royal capital, a structure that usually stands as a bastion of noble tranquility. However, the peace is shattered by a violent disturbance that feels akin to a natural disaster. Inside the villa, the household staff is thrown into a state of panic. Two maids tremble in the hallway, their eyes wide with terror as the walls seem to vibrate around them. One maid questions if they are experiencing an earthquake, while the heavy, thundering footsteps approaching them suggest a more human threat. The sound effects dominate the panel, visualizing the heavy zun of aggressive strides. Terrified, the maids scream, "Kaya!" as the source of the commotion comes into view. They mistake the intruder for a bandit, overwhelmed by his ferocious aura. The man storming through the corridor is indeed Serge Frisier, but his expression is so contorted with rage that he is barely unrecognizable as the young lord. He roars a demand to know his sister's location, shouting, "Where is Garnet?" with a ferocity that suggests he is ready to tear the villa apart to find her. Serge's rampage halts abruptly as he notices the terrified state of the servants. In a jarring shift of demeanor that highlights his chaotic emotional state, he instantly pivots from a roaring berserker to a polite, albeit intense, nobleman. He bows slightly, apologizing to the maids for interrupting their work, shouting, "I see. I'm sorry even though you're busy." He quickly follows up with a direct inquiry, asking if his sister is in her room. When the trembling maid stammers a confirmation, why she is, Serge immediately bellows, "Thank you," and resumes his charge down the hall. The maids are left in his wake, clutching their chests. One recognizes him as Lord Serge, while the other whispers that while his face is terrifying, he is actually a good person at heart. Serge stomps away, the heavy impact of his boots echoing the sound, "Zoon zoon," once more. He mutters Garnet's name, his focus narrowing entirely on her. His momentum is so great that it seems the very doors he approaches are in danger of breaking under his urgency. He bursts into Garnet's room without the courtesy of a knock, the door swinging open to reveal his sister inside. Garnet stands by the window, her hand covering her mouth and eyes, her posture suggesting deep sorrow. Serge's eyes widen as he beholds her, assuming the worst. However, Garnet is not weeping. She lowers her hand, exhaling a weary "geez," and looks at her brother with dry, clear eyes. She calmly corrects the narrative before he can spiral further, stating simply, "No, it was annulled." She seems more annoyed by the noise than the political disaster, complaining about him making a fuss this late at night. Serge, still vibrating with adrenaline, is taken aback by her lack of tears. He exclaims, "Brother, you didn't even knock," realizing he has intruded. He interprets her composure through the lens of denial or misinformation. He assumes that because she isn't wailing in despair, the rumors must be false. He sighs in relief, saying, "I guess the engagement being annulled was false, wasn't it? I'm glad." Garnet's silence serves as a correction. The reality sets in, and Serge's rage reignites instantly, hotter than before. He slams his fist against the wall with a violent, Baki sound. He screams, "Screw them," his anger directed squarely at the royal family. He declares that he doesn't care if they are royalty, he won't stand for this. He laments that his sister was made a laughingstock before the crowd. The force of his punch is such that he injures his own hand, grimacing and muttering, "Ouch," as he clutches his bruised knuckles. Garnet watches this display with a flat, unimpressed expression. She asks him pointedly, "How can you make a big fuss by yourself?" finding his solo tantrum both exhausting and slightly ridiculous. She confirms the facts. "So, as I've been told, the engagement was broken off." Serge trembles, his body shaking with the force of his emotions. He turns to her, genuinely baffled by her stoicism. He admits he doesn't understand why she is so calm. He points out the absurdity of the situation. He is more upset than the person actually involved in the mess. Realizing he has lost control, he takes a breath and apologizes, admitting, "I'm sorry. I lost my composure." Garnet smiles, a genuine, soft expression finally breaking through her mask. She suggests that her reaction, or lack thereof, might be the result of the Queen's strict upbringing, implying that years of protocol training have hardened her against public emotional displays. Serge, softened by her resilience, reaches out and gently pats her head. He acknowledges that her explanation may be true, but his eyes are filled with brotherly concern. He looks at her with deep affection and sadness, expressing a wish for her future. He hopes that someday she will find a woman, or rather, a partner, correcting the gender context to standard romance tropes, though the text says, "woman," likely due to translation error, he means he hopes she finds someone who can see her for who she truly is. He calls her by her nickname, Nettie, telling her she has worked hard. He validates her struggle, acknowledging she has been through a lot. The conversation shifts to political analysis. Serge deduces that while this event started with Prince Narcissus's selfishness, there is no doubt that he had the Queen's approval to act this way. Garnet agrees, yes. She admits that even with her preparation, she didn't think the royal family would seriously try to get rid of them entirely. She reveals the second half of the decree. "On top of that, I have also been ordered to be engaged to Prince Razulus." Serge's expression darkens as he connects the dots. He exclaims, "Ha!" in disbelief. He begins to pace, unraveling the conspiracy aloud. He notes that the Frisier family, by itself, is far ahead of the Queen's own family, the Ammons, in terms of power and influence. He theorizes that the royals feared Serge or Garnet would be linked to other heirs to the throne, thereby threatening the current line of succession. He identifies the new fiancé with disdain. "Lazulis is that ghost prince." He concludes, "We've been had," realizing they were outmaneuvered. However, Garnet interrupts his defeatism with a sharp observation. She points out, "But His Highness Razulus also has a claim to the throne." She questions the logic of the royals. Even so, does that mean that the second prince is not deemed a threat? In this oversight, Garnet sees a crack in their armor. She declares, "And I see an opportunity where no one else would." The narrative takes a surreal visual turn to emphasize the magnitude of Garnet's next statement. She calmly announces her plan. "We'll put His Highness Prince Razulus on the throne and make him king." Serge is so shocked by this treasonous declaration that his mind figuratively blasts off into the cosmos. The panel depicts Garnet and Serge sitting on a sofa floating in the middle of outer space, surrounded by galaxies and stars. Serge's face is blank, erased by shock, as he utters a faint what. Garnet continues, unfazed by her brother's dissociation, stating, "I, Garnet Freezier." Serge struggles to process this, stammering, "What do you mean?" The scene snaps back to reality in the drawing room. Garnet's face hardens, losing its gentle smile. She reveals the true source of her motivation, which is not merely political survival but personal retribution. She recalls the moment of the annulment, visualizing Narcissus's face. She tells Serge, "His Highness Narcissus was laughing." Serge looks at her, confused and concerned, asking, "What are you?" Garnet elaborates, her voice cold. She observed that Narcissus was enjoying her reaction to being humiliated and hurt. She states her philosophical stance on leadership. If everything is done purely and good, then the priests would rule the country. She is pragmatic. She does not ask a king to be honest and upright. She understands the dirty nature of politics. However, she draws a line at cruelty. She notes that the annulment was not something that needed to be declared loudly in a public venue. She identifies the event for what it was. That was obviously a vulgar event for me, a spectacle designed solely for Narcissus's entertainment. Serge listens, bowing his head, murmuring, "I know." He tries to comfort her, "Nettie, that's..." But Garnet cuts him off with a fierce, "Still." Her eyes blaze with determination. She issues her final verdict on the crown prince, "I will not have such a man as that as my king." She condemns his character flaw, the specific sadism of trampling on someone else's life for fun. This moral refusal is the bedrock of her rebellion. She will forge a new king not just to save her family, but to deny the throne to a man she deems unworthy of the crown. In a dimly lit chamber, heavy with the scent of conspiracy and the weight of aristocratic ambition, a conversation of high stakes unfolds between siblings of the noble Freezier house. Serge Freezier, a man whose confident posture belies the dangerous game he plays, addresses his sister, Garnet, with a mixture of pragmatic calculation and familial familiarity. He acknowledges her capabilities, noting that if gender roles were reversed, his own position as the heir might have been compromised by her competence. Garnet, displaying a practiced grace, deflects the compliment with a humble, somewhat weary gratitude, her expression betraying a hint of resignation regarding the path laid out for her. The conversation pivots to the core of their political machinations, the royal succession. Serge dismisses the likelihood of the current prospect ascending to power, casting doubt on the boy's viability as a ruler. Garnet recounts the rumors swirling within the court, information she has gathered with the diligence expected of her station. She notes that His Highness Lazulis is reputed to be sickly and, significantly, is 4 years her junior, a mere child in the eyes of the court and, presumably, herself. Despite the rumors, she questions the feasibility of their overarching plan, her voice laced with the uncertainty of gambling on a fragile pawn. Serge, however, remains undeterred, suggesting that a few years of careful maneuvering could bridge the gap and alter the political landscape in their favor. He gestures with the assurance of a master tactician, asserting that this specific void in power is exactly where his unique set of skills will prove most effective. Serge proceeds to lecture on the unique legalities of the kingdom's succession laws, a crucial detail that underpins their entire strategy. He explains that the throne does not pass automatically to the firstborn, a deviation from standard primogeniture that creates an opening for external influence. Instead, the heir is chosen through a process of nomination and subsequent approval by both the sitting king and the populace. Garnet, listening to the complexities of the plan, remarks dryly that by the time such a long-term scheme comes to fruition, she will have aged considerably, highlighting the personal cost of their political ambition. Serge laments the timeline, musing that if the age gap between Garnet and the prince were wider, twice the current 4 years, he would have had the opportunity to mold the boy from scratch, effectively raising a puppet king. He frames this manipulation not as treason, but as a necessity for the survival and continuation of their family name, seeking her validation for the cause. With a flourish of dramatic resolve, Serge declares his total commitment to the endeavor, announcing that he, Serge Freezier, is fully invested in the scheme. Having laid out the mechanics of the plot, he formally requests his sister's cooperation, framing her role as essential to their success. He rationalizes their actions, constructing a moral defense for what might otherwise be seen as a power grab. He insists that their maneuvering constitutes neither a conspiracy nor a usurpation of the throne. In his view, they are merely exercising their legitimate rights within the framework of the kingdom's laws, a justification meant to soothe any lingering ethical qualms. As the conversation shifts from cold strategy to personal welfare, Serge's expression softens, revealing the protective brother beneath the political operative. He expresses a genuine hope that Prince Lazulis, despite being a tool for their ambition, turns out to be a decent person. He emphasizes that while this union is undeniably a political marriage forged for advantage, he retains a deep desire for Garnet's personal happiness. He offers her a liberating contingency. If she happens to develop genuine feelings for the prince, she should embrace that happiness without feeling constrained by her role as a pawn in their game. He reaffirms her value not just as a sister, but as the next head of the family and a powerful ally in her own right. Garnet, touched by this unexpected tenderness, admits that she had never considered the possibility of personal happiness within this arrangement. Her internal monologue reflects a deep appreciation for her brother's hidden kindness, acknowledging the duality of his nature, ruthless for the family, but gentle for her. The scene transitions to the royal palace, where the abstract planning meets reality. Garnet, dressed in the impeccable attire of a high noblewoman, kneels in a sunlit hall, her head bowed in a gesture of profound respect. She formally introduces herself as Garnet Frisier, her voice steady as she greets Prince Lazoulis. The prince, obscured from view, responds with a statement that immediately sets a cold, transactional tone for their meeting. He declares that he does not seek love in their marriage. He defines his existence solely by his birth into a powerful family, asserting that he has only one responsibility and one role to fulfill, mirroring Garnet's own indoctrination into duty. As Garnet listens, she detects a jarring discrepancy between the gravity of his words and the timbre of his voice. The sound that reaches her ears is undeniably young, lacking the deep resonance of a man, which prompts a flicker of confusion behind her bowed head. The prince, seemingly indifferent to protocol, commands her to lift her head, dismissing the need for such rigid formality. He instructs her that, from this moment forward, she need not bow to him, signaling a desire for a relationship, or perhaps a distance, that defies standard court etiquette. Garnet acknowledges the command with a polite affirmative, preparing to rise. The narrative tension spikes as Garnet lifts her eyes to behold her betrothed for the first time. The revelation hits her with the force of a physical blow, shattering her composed demeanor. Her internal monologue screams in disbelief at the sight before her. The prince is not merely younger. He is diminutive, a small figure that defies the mental image she had constructed. Her thoughts race, grappling with the visual evidence that he appears far smaller than a boy merely 4 years her junior should be. The realization that this small child is His Highness Lazoulis sends shockwaves through her. However, the shock instantly transmutes into a very different, overwhelming emotion. Garnet's eyes widen, sparkling with an intensity that borders on unprofessional. Her internal assessment shifts from confusion to an overpowering sense of adoration. She finds him undeniably, devastatingly cute. A stifled sound of delight escapes her, a betrayal of her stoic training. The prince, noticing her intense, unblinking gaze, innocently asks if there is something on his face, unaware of the internal chaotic infatuation he has triggered. Garnet stammers, her mind short-circuiting as she tries to articulate a denial while her internal voice continues to scream, "Cute." Desperately trying to regain her footing, Garnet reminds herself of the stakes. She knows she must make a favorable first impression, recognizing that this initial encounter is the key to their future relations and the success of her brother's plan. She forces herself to speak, apologizing profusely and assuring him that she meant no disrespect by her staring. The prince, displaying a maturity far beyond his physical years, accepts her apology with a calm grace, stating that if there is no issue, then it is fine. He gently chides that it is impolite to stare at someone's face, a reprimand delivered with the solemnity of a king in the body of a child. Garnet mentally scourges herself, commanding her own psyche to pull together and maintain the facade of a dignified lady. She vehemently denies any negative intent, correcting her internal trajectory. Regaining a semblance of composure, she restates her position, confirming that, as he has likely heard, she is his fiancée. Lazoulis acknowledges this fact with a weary familiarity, indicating he has been briefed on the arrangement. Garnet, forcing a pleasant and professional smile, repeats her introduction, trying to restart the interaction on a more stable footing. Lazoulis, however, cuts through the pleasantries with a cynical sharpness. He gazes at her with eyes that seem too old for his face, suggesting that the engagement is merely a formality. He demonstrates a painful self-awareness, stating that he understands why someone like him was forced upon her, revealing a deep-seated insecurity about his worth and his sickly nature. He references a past event, noting that her brother had previously broken off an engagement, implying he views himself as a consolation prize or a burden. He apologizes to Garnet, expressing sympathy that she has to endure this arrangement, framing himself as the source of her potential misfortune. The prince continues his self-deprecating monologue, dismantling the expectations of their union. He warns her explicitly not to expect anything in return for the marriage, asserting his belief that he cannot be of any use to her. Garnet attempts to interject, to deny his harsh assessment of himself, but he plows forward, driven by his own internal logic of unworthiness. He goes so far as to grant her permission to take a lover, completely absolving her of marital fidelity in anticipation of his own inadequacy. He insists that she need not worry about him or even visit him, effectively isolating himself. With a finality that stuns Garnet, Lazuli dismisses her, telling her to go home early. He claims fatigue, stating his intention to rest, a convenient excuse to escape the interaction. As a parting blow, he outlines his exit strategy. He promises to cancel the engagement himself at a later time, ensuring that the blame will fall on him rather than her, a final act of sacrificial kindness. Garnet is left reeling, crying out for him to wait, completely blindsided by the speed at which he has rejected her and dismantled their future. The suddenness of the dismissal leaves her in shock, processing the fact that it is already over. As Lazuli walks away, Garnet stares at his retreating figure. The narration highlights the smallness of his back, emphasizing his vulnerability. He does not look back, maintaining his facade of cold detachment. Garnet's thoughts swirl, seemingly touching upon a sense of loss or rejection. She wonders if this is what it would be like to have a little brother, her mind grasping for a framework to understand the feelings rushing through her. She reflects on the singularity of the moment, realizing she never expected to be rejected so thoroughly at their very first meeting. However, the final panel reveals the truth of Garnet's internal state, subverting the expected reaction to a political rejection. Instead of despair or anger at the failed alliance, Garnet clutches her cheeks, her face flushed with euphoria. She is not heartbroken, she is overwhelmed by his cuteness. The narrative confirms that Garnet is feeling intense happiness, completely ignoring the political disaster that just occurred. The text emphasizes how cute, underlining that her cool beauty character has completely collapsed in the face of the prince's adorable, albeit melancholy, demeanor. The chapter concludes on this note of comedic character dissonance, promising a story where the protagonist's obsession with the prince's cuteness will likely override all political common sense. In the serene, sun-dappled expanse of the royal gardens, Lady Garnet approaches the seated figure of Prince Lazuli, who is engrossed in a thick book. She carries a silver tray laden with a steaming teapot and a delicate cup, her expression radiating a gentle, persistent warmth as she offers him a reprieve from his studies, noting that fresh tea has just been served. Lazuli, wearing a dark, high-collared tunic with intricate embroidery, glances up from his reading with a look of mild annoyance mixed with resignation. He realizes the futility of resisting her hospitality and closes his book, sighing as he agrees to relax with a warm drink. The scene shifts as Garnet watches Lazuli bring the teacup to his lips. Her face lights up with genuine delight when he remarks that the beverage is delicious, and she clasps her hands together, expressing her happiness that the blend she ordered specifically for him meets his approval. When the prince questions if the specific order implies she is a health maniac, she launches into an enthusiastic explanation of the tea's medicinal properties, listing its benefits, improving blood circulation and alleviating stiff shoulders, back pain, and insomnia. However, the atmosphere fractures instantly when Garnet inadvertently touches a nerve. She admits her worry stems from the fact that His Highness is too small, a descriptor that causes Lazuli to recoil violently. The background explodes into jagged shapes as he shouts at her to stop using that word, his expression morphing into one of shock and offense, while Garnet, unfazed and somewhat oblivious, continues to fret over his physical stature. Lazuli stammers, looking as though he has been handed a death sentence, while Garnet seamlessly pivots her logic, suggesting that since he is small, they should take a nap immediately. Lazuli attempts to protest, pointing out that she used the forbidden word, small again, but Garnet overrides him with a lecture on developmental biology. She posits that his lack of sleep is a primary contributor to his diminutive stature, asserting that rest is essential for human development. Lazuli tries to deny this, but Garnet leans in, her eyes narrowing with suspicion as she reveals she has heard rumors of his tendency to stay up late into the night, a confrontation that leaves the prince stammering and unable to form a coherent defense. Seizing the momentum, Garnet claps her hands together and gestures toward her own lap, inviting him to lay his head there. The prince stares at her in utter bewilderment, demanding to know the connection between his sleep habits and her lap, asking if she is mocking him. Internally, Garnet is operating on a completely different wavelength. She visualizes a lap pillow as a supreme, strategic weapon in her arsenal, imagining a romantic trope where a smile and a gentle tap on the lap inevitably leads to the target blushing and romance blossoming. Before Lazuli can fully process this bizarre request, the effects of the herbal tea kick in with aggressive speed. His vision blurs, and the world tilts on its axis. He clutches his forehead, swaying dangerously as he questions what is happening to him. Garnet, anticipating this, beckons him closer, and as his knees buckle, she catches him. Lazuli, in his haze, briefly suspects foul play, wondering why the scene resembles a poisoning, but Garnet soothingly reassures him that his stomach is simply full, inducing natural sleepiness. Gravity wins, and the prince collapses softly onto Garnet's lap. He murmurs a confused question about how this fate befell him, to which Garnet simply replies, "Fate," before offering to sing him a lullaby. Lazuli grumbles that he doesn't understand the situation, but his resistance is fading rapidly. Garnet begins to sing, her voice filling the garden. Visualizations of musical notes float through the air as she croons about children, falling curtains, and rocking cradles. In his semi-conscious state, Lazuli critically analyzes her performance, noting with irritation that her vibrato is uselessly well executed and technically perfect, yet despite his annoyance, the darkness claims him. The imagery shifts to a dreamscape of soft lights and darkness as the lyrics describe a warm night and soft dreams, the moon laughing and stars inviting him to rest. A fleeting memory surfaces in the prince's mind, a recollection of a cradle rocking long ago and a face he cannot remember, before he surrenders completely to the command to sleep well. Silence descends upon the garden. Garnet looks down at the sleeping boy, noting the rhythmic sound of his breathing. A sense of nostalgia washes over her as she feels the warmth of his weight on her lap. She observes his defenseless form, finding it undeniably cute, and decides that her efforts were not in vain. Internally, she compares this moment to her past experiences visiting a farm in her territory, likening the prince to the animals she interacted with there, a thought that confirms she made the right decision to prepare the special tea. She reflects on the tea's main effect, inducing sleep, and her own singing lessons, satisfied that the custom-ordered herbal blend worked as intended. She reaches out, her gloved hand gently brushing the bangs from his forehead. She muses that perhaps his body was craving sleep more than he realized for the tea to be this effective. Looking at his peaceful face, she silently acknowledges his resilience, noting that despite being young and small, he is a tough individual who endures much. Time passes, indicated by the shifting light. Lazuli abruptly wakes with a start, realizing his circulation has been cut off. He attempts to stand but stumbles, his legs failing him, prompting Garnet to ask what is wrong. Lazuli, flustered and embarrassed, apologizes for sleeping so long and admits his legs are numb, though Garnet graciously assures him she does not mind. As he attempts to leave, urgency overtaking him, he stumbles again, letting out a sharp cry of pain. Confusion reigns as he insists on returning to the palace, but his body refuses to cooperate, leading his paranoid mind to instantly jump back to the conclusion that he has been poisoned. Panic erupts in the garden. Servants rush onto the scene, shouting for help and calling for a doctor, misunderstanding the situation completely. In a comedic twist of fate, it is Garnet who is hoisted onto a stretcher by the frantic staff. Lazuli stands bewildered as the servants yell to carry Lady Garnet, gently, assuming she is the victim of some terrible affliction. She protests weakly, insisting she is fine and that it is just numbness, but her voice is drowned out by the chaos as someone orders Lord Surge to be contacted at the royal palace. Lazuli watches the procession depart, utterly confused, wondering why the woman who gave him a lap pillow is being evacuated like a casualty of war. The scene shifts to the aftermath, where Garnet lies on a sofa, recovering from the pins and needles in her legs. Her brother, tears streaming down his face, wails dramatically about her near-death experience, while Garnet snaps at him, shouting that he is exaggerating and that she was merely carried on a stretcher because of numbness. Despite the absurdity, her thoughts immediately drift back to Lazuli. She worries about how the prince is faring and hopes he doesn't think she is weird for the incident. A maid, Sarah, is called over, and sudden excitement erupts in the room, with Garnet beaming and exclaiming, "That's great," while sound effects of high-pitched squealing fill the air. Garnet begins to ramble enthusiastically about breathing and lap pillows, connecting the prince's willingness to sleep on her lap to the power of the royal family, leaving her brother and servants confused by her logic. She realizes that her previous attempts to woo him had only elicited cold reactions, implying that the prince is a formidable challenge she had underestimated. However, his vulnerability in the garden has ignited a new fire in her. She clenches a fist, resolving that she wants to know him better and reaffirming her desire to see him become king. She acknowledges that winning over this little prince will require significantly more effort than she initially anticipated. The narrative transitions into a montage of their daily interactions, showing the passage of time. Garnet becomes a persistent shadow in Lazuli's life. In a hallway, she presents a placard regarding the upcoming wedding in spring, declaring it her duty to be there, while Lazuli shouts at her to leave him alone. The montage continues with scenes of them in the rose garden, Lazuli looking annoyed while Garnet smiles brightly. A thought bubble depicting a dog suggests she still views him with the same affection one gives a pet. We see them sitting on a bench where she silences him with a finger to her lips, and another moment where she watches him sketch or read, her gaze soft and attentive. At a dining table, the battle of wills continues over food. Garnet, clapping her hands rhythmically, encourages Lazuli to eat more, cheering him on. Lazuli complains that her pressure makes it harder to swallow, calling the meal a ritual, but Garnet observes internally that his daily life shows signs of improvement. She notes that he doesn't treat her as poorly as he used to and that the amount of food he consumes has incrementally increased. She observes his eating habits closely, wondering why he eats so slowly and seemingly prefers plain, bland foods like bread and simple salads over elaborate dishes, speculating if he believes in living a simple, austere life. When Lazuli's attempts to end the meal, Garnet intervenes, insisting they must exercise to complement the nutrition. She proposes a walk, but Lazuli's groans, arguing that they don't need to do this every day. Garnet then pulls out a diagram, a visual chart comparing two silhouettes, and drops a devastating statistic. His Highness is approximately 60% as tall as she is. She refers to him as 0.6 Garnet, a bizarre unit of measurement that leaves Lazuli's dumbfounded. She cheerfully argues that if they walk together, attaining a height of 1.5 Garnets is not just a dream, framing the walk as a way to build muscle, correct his life rhythm, and bathe in sunshine. Lazuli's, realizing resistance is futile against her overwhelming logic, resignedly agrees to accompany her, just to stop the lecture. As they walk side by side, the height difference is apparent. Lazuli's, looking determined, declares that he will grow bigger than her one day, to which Garnet replies with a giggle that she is looking forward to it. Lazuli's asserts he will surpass her height in no time, and Garnet gently tells him not to worry, a moment of genuine camaraderie forming between them. The mood shifts abruptly as night falls. In his chambers, Lazuli's is reading by candlelight. A servant, Bernard, enters, advising him to rest. Lazuli's, still absorbed in the story, demands the continuation of the book, but Bernard apologizes, stating he overstepped and echoing Garnet's sentiment that staying up late is not admirable. Lazuli's snaps, telling Bernard not to sound like Garnet, but eventually relents, agreeing to get ready for bed. Suddenly, the panel fractures violently. Lazuli's lurches forward, and a splatter of fluid erupts from his mouth with a sickening "bearsh" sound effect. He grips the furniture, his vision swimming. He thinks of Garnet's noisy interference, "Don't do that, don't do this," and feels a wave of despair, realizing that despite her care, it all amounts to nothing. He collapses to the floor. Lying prone, his internal monologue turns dark and analytical. He realizes he hasn't died yet, grimly noting that the dosage was painful but far from lethal, calculated to cause suffering rather than immediate death. He understands the cruelty of the act. The perpetrator knows he cannot retaliate, knows that even if the poison is discovered, Lazuli's has no one to protect him and no power beyond his title. He coughs, feeling the physical and emotional sickness rise within him. Servants rush into the room, screaming in horror upon finding the prince collapsed and vomiting. Panic ensues as they shout for a doctor and order messengers to run to the royal palace. Bernard supports the prince, who is trembling and sweating profusely. Amidst the commotion, Lazuli's feels a profound sense of disgust. He is repulsed not just by the poison, but by the sheer malice directed at him, that someone hates him enough to do this, yet keeps him alive to suffer. Tears stream down his face as he thinks, "Disgusting. I feel sick." He reflects on his existence, living while being hated to this extent, and for a moment he genuinely wishes they would just kill him to end it. But then, a memory pierces through the darkness. He sees Garnet's smiling face. He hears her voice telling him, "You mustn't, Your Highness," and reminding him that he has her with him. He recalls her promise that he will grow to be much bigger than she is, a vow she swore on her family name. These memories act as a lifeline. Her voice tells him, "Don't give up. Live." Lazuli's grits his teeth, his expression shifting from despair to angry determination. He questions what she is doing to him, realizing that every time she speaks of his future with such glee, his heart flutters with a desire to see it through. He curses softly, "Damn," the chapter ending on his resolved face, the light of her hope cutting through his darkness, leaving him with a mixture of bewilderment and expectation for the future he must now fight to reach. The quiet, polished corridors of a grand residence, where light filters through ornate windows to illuminate a scene of formal service. A maid with dark hair, dressed in a crisp uniform with a ruffled apron, stands with a polite yet guarded posture, bowing her head slightly as she addresses the noblewoman before her. She informs the guest that Bernard has departed for the royal palace on business and that she will assume the duty of guiding her for the day. Garnet Frezier, the noblewoman, regards the servant with a calm, discerning gaze, acknowledging the change in arrangement with a silent acceptance. The maid, however, seems to hesitate, her professional mask slipping for a fraction of a second as she looks at Garnet, seemingly unsure of how to proceed with the conversation. Garnet, observing the servant's unease, wonders internally about the schedule for the day, her expression remaining composed and unreadable. Suddenly, the atmosphere in the corridor shifts as the maid's demeanor fractures. She questions Garnet's persistence, her voice trembling with a mix of frustration and misplaced righteousness. The maid clasps her hands together, her brow furrowed in distress, and exclaims that she feels sorry for His Highness. She admits her forwardness but presses on, claiming that as someone who has served His Highness for many years, she understands the depths of his heart. She accuses Garnet of forcing a lifestyle change upon the prince that he clearly detests, insisting that His Highness is troubled by these intrusions. The maid casts a judgmental look at Garnet, asserting that a young woman like Lady Garnet could not possibly understand the nuances of the situation. Garnet receives this unexpected outburst with a stoic grace, her eyes slightly widening but her posture remaining rigid. She acknowledges the servant's words, thanking her for the advice with a coolness that belies her internal processing of the information. She promises to consider the servant's perspective, musing that if His Highness truly and seriously rejected her, the situation would indeed be different. However, Garnet's mind races with contradictory evidence. She reflects on the possibility that the issue is not merely one of being a picky eater or a simple dislike of her presence. She recalls observing signs of genuine hunger in the prince on several occasions, noting that despite his refusal to eat, the physiological need remains. She lists the symptoms she has witnessed: his poor sleep patterns and his reluctance to leave his chambers. Garnet's gaze sharpens, piercing through the maid's emotional facade. She challenges the servant's claim of many years of service, suggesting that if the maid truly knew the prince so well, she would already understand the root cause of his behavior. Garnet resolves that she cannot simply withdraw at this juncture. The stakes are too high, and the mystery of the prince's condition requires her intervention. Her attention shifts to the broader anomalies within the detached palace. She observes the shadows of the staff, noting a strange and rapid turnover rate among the servants. It strikes her as suspicious that individuals with unknown backgrounds have infiltrated the household. Despite the small number of staff, which seems disproportionate to the mansion's vast size, the work appears to be completed efficiently, a discrepancy that raises further questions in Garnet's analytical mind. Garnet confronts the maid directly, noting that despite the maid's claims of long service, this is the first time Garnet has seen her face. She questions whether the woman truly serves in the capacity she claims. Garnet reveals her acute observational skills, stating that she has memorized the faces of the maids due to their frantic activity whenever a guest is present. The maid stiffens, her cover blown by Garnet's meticulous memory. Garnet dismisses the need for a guide from this point forward, stating she can navigate the rest of the way on her own. She turns her back on the stunned servant, remarking that a maid has a variety of duties and implying that this particular maid should attend to hers. As she walks away, the sound of her footsteps echoing against the walls, she leaves the impostor behind. Walking alone, Garnet's thoughts drift to her family, the Freesiers. She thinks of her father and brother, who are deeply entrenched in their work, and acknowledges that the situation at the detached palace is not something the Freesier family can easily interfere with. She anticipates that resolving the issues here will take time and likely result in a headache, adding to the burden she already carries. She reminds herself that the authority over the detached palace and its employees falls strictly under the jurisdiction of the royal palace, complicating any direct action she might wish to take. Garnet arrives at the young prince's quarters. His Highness, Lazulis, sits by a window, looking out with a vacant, absent-minded expression. Garnet notes his distraction and inquires about his plans, breaking his reverie. The young prince starts, apologizing as he explains he was contemplating his schedule for the remainder of the day. He informs Garnet that he has significant preparation to do and requests to leave early. He mentions a soiree scheduled for that evening at the royal palace. Garnet realizes this means she will be free for the afternoon, a rare occurrence. Suddenly, the young prince declares with childish petulance that he is not going to the party. Garnet queries his decision, and he adamantly repeats his refusal. However, upon realizing that Garnet might attend, he shifts his tone, encouraging her to join the festivities even without him. He offers a forced smile, telling her that it cannot be helped and that he hopes she will do well even in his absence. Garnet accepts his dismissal, bowing as she takes her leave, though she notes how easily he backed off, a reaction that lingers in her mind. Later, Garnet stands beneath the open sky with her brother, Serge. He looks at her with concern, asking if she is sure about attending the event. He warns her that she will inevitably become the center of attention and advises her to watch her step, his protective instinct flaring. Garnet responds with cool confidence, asserting that she has done nothing to embarrass their family. Serge agrees, reaffirming his support. They arrive at the venue, announced formally as Lord Serge Freesier and Lady Garnet Freesier. As they enter the grand hall, the air fills with the murmur of gossip. Bystanders whisper, noting that fewer people approach the Freesier siblings now. Spectators comment on Garnet's presence, remarking that if they were in her position, the shame would prevent them from attending. Yet, they observe Garnet's composure with grudging respect, noting that she carries herself with more poise than expected. The whispers delve into the scandal involving His Highness Narcisse, who was taken away by a mere viscount's daughter, leading to speculation that this betrayal is the reason Garnet has been frequenting the detached palace lately. The crowd's attention shifts as the herald announces the arrival of Viscount Barquette's daughter, Lady Isabelle Barquette, and His Royal Highness Narcisse Genoise. The visual contrast is stark. Isabelle clings to Narcisse's arm, her demeanor lacking the refined elegance expected of high nobility. Onlookers criticize Isabelle's appearance, noting she looks underdressed and suggesting her reputation is disgraceful. They whisper about her hair not being properly styled and question whether rural Viscount households fail to teach proper etiquette. Meanwhile, Garnet watches from a distance, her eyes fixing on Narcisse's face, a face she hasn't seen in some time. She feels a pang of worry despite the circumstances. Internally, Garnet grapples with the wreckage of her past engagement. She reflects on how she did everything for Narcisse's sake, questioning if her devotion was not love, what else it could have been. She realizes that her definition of love differed from the connection Isabelle and Narcisse share. She acknowledges the painful truth that Narcisse hates her and acts to humiliate her, yet she maintains that in her own way, she was trying to build a life with him. She credits her persona as the Garnet of the Frisier family for keeping her from falling apart completely. She admits to herself the hurt and the sadness she endured, acknowledging that her efforts were ultimately in vain. Forcing a smile onto her face, Garnet prepares to greet them. She approaches Narcisse, expressing relief at seeing him and feigning worry about his absence. Isabelle, holding Narcisse's arm, interrupts with a sickly sweet tone, asking why Garnet didn't come with her fiancé. She feigns ignorance, looking around as if searching for someone, specifically His Highness Lazoulis. Garnet politely greets both Narcisse and Isabelle, thanking them for the invitation, maintaining her perfect mask of courtesy. Isabelle continues her verbal assault, suggesting that Lazoulis simply didn't want to come with Garnet. Garnet calmly explains that His Highness Lazoulis is unwell. Isabelle scoffs, dismissing the excuse and laughing cruelly, remarking that dedication doesn't always bear fruit. She brings up the rumors that Garnet is desperate, visiting the detached palace every 2 days in a pathetic attempt to cling to relevance. Isabelle twists the knife, asking if it isn't miserable that not just Narcisse, but even Lazoulis, seems to reject her. Narcisse, standing beside Isabelle, looks increasingly uncomfortable, pleading with Isabelle to stop. Serge steps forward, his patience exhausted. He cuts into the conversation, his voice icy as he addresses the breach of etiquette. He questions whose behavior is truly impolite, silencing Isabelle. Narcisse attempts to rebuke Serge for the interruption, but Serge counters immediately, pointing out that Narcisse wouldn't even let Garnet finish her greeting. He bluntly reminds Narcisse that Garnet is no longer his fiancé. Narcisse, flustered and defensive, demands that Serge stop being so friendly, and questions why Serge focuses on another woman when Isabelle is present. The tension escalates as Serge shifts the conversation from social pleasantries to hard political realities. He questions why their country does not adhere to a firstborn inheritance system. Narcisse accuses Serge of misunderstanding the royal family, but Serge presses on, stating that the crown chooses the most worthy candidate. Serge drops a bombshell of political fact. With the exception of the Blanchile family, the only house capable of competing with the Amanda family is the Frisier family. He cites historical war records to back his claim, asserting the military dominance of his lineage. Serge's eyes narrow as he delivers a thinly veiled threat. He warns Narcisse that insulting the Frisiers while knowing their history is a bold and dangerous move. He reminds the prince that the position of a king's son is precarious and can be easily shaken. Narcisse stammers, asking if Serge thinks they can't handle the Frisiers. Serge replies that it is too convenient for Narcisse to assume he can stay in his current position forever. Narcisse interprets this as a declaration of rebellion. Serge relentlessly lists the assets at his disposal, the 3 great cities they rule and their allied families. He asks Narcisse to calculate how many troops could be mobilized from these sources if the Frisiers were cut off. Narcisse, pale and sweating, finds himself unable to answer. Suddenly, Serge breaks the tension with a loud, forced laugh, claiming it was all just a joke. He smiles broadly, patting the air as if to wave away the threat he just leveled. He announces that they will be on their way, leaving a stunned Narcisse and Isabelle in their wake. As they walk away, Serge casually remarks that surely Narcisse can let a simple joke slide. He guides Garnet away from the confrontation. Outside, away from the suffocating atmosphere of the party, Serge praises Garnet for holding her ground. Garnet, however, feels defeated, apologizing to her brother for being unable to say anything back during the confrontation. Serge comforts her, reminding her that when times get tough, she can share her load with him and their father. He assures her there is no shame in relying on them. Garnet worries about His Highness Lazoulis, but Serge laughs gently, telling her she doesn't have to carry everything alone. He reminds her that while he is an adult, she is still a child, emphasizing the blessing of having a place to return to and people who love her. Garnet absorbs his words, realizing the truth in them. Serge looks at his sister with deep affection, advising her not to push herself too hard. He acknowledges her concern for the young Lazulis but warns her that she still has soft parts that can be hurt if she gets stung. He tells her not to blame her struggles on immaturity or inexperience, reminding her that she is only 16 years old. Despite his comfort, Garnet's mind wanders to abstract concepts, questioning the true nature of love as she considers geography, history, etiquette, politics, and economics, the subjects she has studied so diligently. She feels she has come to understand what true love is through these lenses. Garnet asks her brother for a detour. She reflects on who was there for her in times of sadness and pain, realizing that often she was all alone. She returns to the detached palace late at night. She finds Lazulis awake, and he expresses surprise at her return. He covers his surprise by claiming he was just about to go to sleep. Garnet approaches him, her expression softening. Lazulis asks if something bad happened, noting that she looks surprisingly expressive. Garnet drops her formal guard. She asks the young prince for a favor, requesting that they move to the living room. Internally, she questions why she cannot hide her feelings in front of him. She wonders if it is because he is a child, or because she feels a deep sympathy for his lonely situation. In the living room, Lazulis bristles, asking if she thinks he is some kind of stuffed animal. Garnet ignores his protest and pleads to be soothed by the warmth of a child. Lazulis, flustered, says it depends on the favor. Garnet asks to hug him tightly. She admits she had a really bad experience that day. Before he can fully protest, she embraces him. Lazulis, blushing and awkward, eventually relents, shouting, "I got it," and claiming that if he had gone with her, she wouldn't feel this way. He insists that this indulgence is only for today. As Garnet wraps her arms around him, she feels the physical warmth seeping into her. Lazulis grumbles but allows it, and Garnet compares the sensation to a fine hot water bottle, teasing him internally. Lazulis accuses her of thinking something rude, but Garnet just holds him tighter, unable to get enough of the comfort. Breaking the silence, Lazulis awkwardly asks for her opinion on his outfit, trying to distract from the intimacy. He realizes he cannot sleep in such clothes and panics slightly. He suggests it is time for her to go home, but then pivots to complimenting her dress. He stammers, trying to say that she looks more glamorous and sparkling tonight. He asks if such an outfit is more to her liking, revealing his insecurity about his own appearance compared to the adults she usually interacts with. Garnet listens as he fumbles for words. Lazulis clarifies that he didn't mean she doesn't look good in her regular clothes, admitting that when he first saw her, he was amazed by her beauty. He struggles to articulate his thoughts on women's attire, apologizing for his lack of knowledge. Garnet cuts him off with a gentle thank you, embracing him again. In her thoughts, Garnet connects her current actions to her past. She realizes she has been living for that person, Narcisse, since she was young, but in embracing Lazulis, she feels she is embracing her own abandoned and hurt younger self. She wants to believe that it is okay to be saved. She sees Lazulis not just as a prince, but as a reflection of her own solitude. She vows that no matter what happens from now on, she will stand by his side. She acknowledges that the path she was cut off from her engagement will likely continue to torment her, but despite the pain and the difficulty, she still wants to live with him. The chapter closes on this note of melancholy resilience, as Garnet looks forward, determined to heal both herself and the boy in her arms. The morning sun filters through the curtains of the detached palace, illuminating a scene of profound embarrassment. Garnet Frisier, usually the picture of composed nobility, sits with her face buried deeply in her gloved hands, her posture radiating utter mortification. The memory of the previous night weighs heavily upon her, causing her to apologize with a fervor that borders on desperation. She exclaims that she is terribly sorry and lacks the face to even look at the young prince. His Highness Lazulis stands before her, looking down with a mixture of confusion and concern etched onto his youthful features. He gently instructs her to lift her head, unsure of what transgression she believes she has committed. Garnet, however, remains hidden behind her hands, her voice trembling as she accuses herself of forcing His Highness to participate in an obscene act during the late hours of the night. Lazulis blinks, taken aback by the severity of her phrasing. He questions her choice of words, his brow furrowing as he insists that the way she describes the event is fundamentally wrong. He attempts to reassure her, stating flatly that it is fine and that he did not truly mind the interaction. Lazulis crouches down to meet her at eye level, his expression shifting from confusion to a dawning realization. He points out that she was likely intoxicated at the time, a fact that seems to explain her uncharacteristic behavior. Garnet lowers her hands slightly, revealing a flushed face and wide, panicked eyes. She stammers, caught off guard by his astute observation. Lazulis recalls the events leading up to the embrace, seeing her on the way to the detached palace following the evening party, and notes that she distinctly smelled of alcohol. Garnet attempts to defend her dignity, explaining that she usually restrains herself with great discipline. She confesses that this was an anomaly, the very first time such a lapse in judgment has occurred. Lazoulis, surprised by this revelation, seeks clarification. He asks if it was truly her first time getting drunk, and specifically, her first time getting involved with someone in such a manner while under the influence. He presses the question, asking if she typically engages in such physical closeness with anyone when her inhibitions are lowered. Garnet confirms his suspicion with a hesitant affirmative, admitting that her loss of control was unique to that specific night and his specific presence. The conversation shifts as Lazuli stands and takes a more serious tone. He acknowledges that he, too, owes her an apology. He admits to hearing rumors regarding the public image fallout of the soirée. He understands now that an engaged woman attending such a high-profile gathering without the escort of her fiancé reflects poorly on her, potentially causing embarrassment and fueling malicious gossip. He apologizes sincerely, fearing that his absence caused her undue shame. Garnet looks up at him, her expression softening. She realizes that his aloofness was not born of malice but of introspection. Lazoulis confesses that he did not think the gathering was a place where he could feel comfortable or well. He admits that he did not intend to strongly invite her because he knew his own limitations. He speaks of his past experiences at such events, describing them as miserable endurance tests where he merely survived the scrutiny rather than participated. The result of his withdrawal, he notes with a hint of self-deprecation, is the current awkward situation. Hearing this, Garnet feels a sudden weight lift from her chest. She realizes that the prince was not rejecting her personally. Rather, he was shielding himself from a painful environment, and in doing so, inadvertently worried about her well-being. She thanks him, her heart feeling significantly lighter knowing that his actions were driven by his own internal struggles and a clumsy attempt to protect her from his own misery. She beams at him, a genuine smile replacing her earlier shame, and extends an invitation. She asks if, perhaps someday, he would be willing to accompany her, noting gently that he cannot afford to hide from the world forever. Lazoulis, seeing her warmth, agrees to do his best. The narrative transitions to a flashback, detailing Garnet's proactive efforts to help the prince reintegrate into society. She recalls suggesting that it was time for him to interact with outsiders, a proposal that was readily accepted by the palace, suggesting they had been waiting for such an initiative. After much deliberation, Garnet selected a teacher to guide the young prince's education. She introduces Raoul Krausch, a man who specializes in history and philosophy. Raoul is presented as the son of the former teacher who instructed both Garnet and her brother, establishing a lineage of trust. Raoul enters the scene with overwhelming energy. He bows and declares his intention to work hard so that the prince can count on him, adding that he believes he can assist in other areas as well. He loudly recalls that Garnet had mentioned the prince was difficult, a comment that causes Garnet to fluster and deny ever saying such a thing. Raoul laughs heartily, ignoring social cues, and comments on Lazoulis having a childhood, asking rhetorically if such a thing existed. Lazoulis, unimpressed by the man's boisterous nature, dryly retorts, "I had so." Garnet sits nearby, sweating nervously, questioning her choice of tutor as Raoul's heavy footsteps and loud demeanor fill the room. The lesson begins, and the atmosphere shifts from comedic to philosophical. Raoul poses a fundamental question to the 12-year-old prince. What kind of person is the ideal king? He notes that until now, Lazoulis has lacked a teacher to guide him in these matters. Raoul states that before they begin their formal education, he wishes to understand the prince's current mode of thinking. Lazoulis responds with a maturity far beyond his years. He posits that the value of a king, whether prudent or generous, fluctuates like the value of money, dependent entirely on the time and the occasion. He elaborates, explaining that in a turbulent world decided by bloodshed, a king who excels only in domestic affairs cannot cope. Conversely, a strong and ferocious king suited for battle might cause chaos in the midst of peace. Raoul listens intently, his glasses catching the light as he absorbs the boy's words. He challenges Lazoulis, asking if this means the prince does not believe a great monarch is something one actively tries to become, but rather something determined by the era. Lazoulis clarifies his position. He believes that the kings proclaimed great in history were simply the ideal figures for their specific times, not that they forced the times to bend to them. He argues that the burden of being a perfect king for all seasons is too much for one person to bear and is essentially a pipe dream. Lazoulis continues, showing a deep understanding of the fluidity of leadership. He states that because the needs of the country change, the definition of an ideal king is hard to encapsulate in a few words. He argues that the best approach is to be willing to be better and to adapt, to differ from time to time in order to enrich the country. He humbly concludes that he knows too little of the world today to give a definitive answer, and that the true measure of a ruler's deeds is often only tested by future generations. He turns the question back to Raoul, stating that he is here to learn the answer to that very question from his teacher. Raoul is struck silent for a moment, his face flushing with sheer excitement. He bursts into a shout of praise, declaring the prince's answer amazing. He realizes that acquiring knowledge through self-study is one thing, but but Lazoulis has digested that knowledge to form his own unique and profound ideas. Raoul internally screams that he has won the golden egg, and vows to raise this boy to be the best monarch possible, completely enraptured by the student's potential. Outside the door, the maid, Sarah, overhears the praise. She shrieks with delight, nearly dropping the tea set. She urges the teacher to praise him more, demanding to hear all of the prince's good points. She is overcome with a wave of emotion, clutching her chest and wondering if this intense feeling of pride means she has become a mother. She stumbles, overwhelmed by what she perceives as maternal instinct, though she initially mistook it for sisterly love. Sarah rushes to Garnet, her eyes sparkling with intense, vicarious romantic ambition. She declares that she wants her lady to have the best love, and wishes to hear a dazzling romance story that will make her giggle and kick her feet. Garnet looks at her maid with confusion, reminding Sarah that she didn't teach her about romance just so Sarah could project maternal fantasies onto the prince. Sarah ignores this, insisting that Garnet needs to feed him more, claiming that because his highness is still small, Garnet has a maternal attachment, but he needs to grow up quickly. Sarah proposes a specific strategy, grabbing the stomach. She suggests Garnet bring homemade sweets to the prince. Garnet hesitates, recalling that the prince has only recently started eating snacks like fruit, implying he might not be ready for heavy sweets. Sarah dismisses the hesitation, insisting that giving handmade sweets is an instant upgrade to their relationship and that Garnet must absolutely do it. The scene shifts to the palace garden, where Garnet and Lazoulis sit on a bench beneath the dappled sunlight. Garnet nervously presents a covered basket to the prince, announcing that she has a gift for him today. She explains that she has an idea of what he might have wished for, specifically referencing a tall animal or beast, and claims she embroidered her wishes into the gift. Her heart beats heavily in her chest as she prepares for the reveal. Lazoulis reaches for the basket, lifting the cloth. The contents are visually obscured by a mosaic of censorship, implying a visual disaster of epic proportions. Lazoulis stares at the dark, indefinable matter in the basket. He looks up at Garnet with a deadpan expression and asks if she hired some poor-quality servants, assuming the terrible state of the food is due to incompetent staff. He identifies them tentatively as baked sweets, though they look more like charcoal. Garnet, flustered and sweating, corrects him. She admits, with great difficulty, that she made them herself. Lazoulis freezes, realizing the gravity of the situation. He stares at the blackened lumps, then back at Garnet. Garnet, realizing the magnitude of her failure, panics. She abruptly tries to snatch the basket back, shouting that she will take responsibility for the product and dispose of it immediately. She claims it is outrageous to feed His Highness such food and that there is no reason for him to endure it. Lazoulis, however, intervenes. He grabs her hand to stop her from taking the basket away. He argues that cooking is an act of sincerity and that it would be wrong to simply throw it away. Despite Garnet's pleas for him not to look at the food, Lazoulis picks up one of the censored lumps. With a brave face, he puts it in his mouth and swallows. A moment of silence passes. Lazoulis blushes slightly and murmurs that, despite its appearance, it is actually good. Garnet stares at him in disbelief, asking repeatedly if he is serious. Lazoulis confirms it is yummy, and promises that if she makes them again, he will eat them. Garnet is struck by a metaphorical arrow of victory, declaring internally that she has conquered His Highness's stomach. The sweet moment is undercut by a sudden memory. Garnet recalls that she used to make sweets when she was little. She warns Lazoulis, with a terrified expression, to please use his baby teeth when eating, just in case. She reveals in a flashback that she once broke her brother's tooth with her rock-hard cooking, a piece of information she neglected to share until after Lazoulis had already taken a bite. She reflects internally that as a candidate for crown princess, she was always expected to be perfect. The fact that Lazoulis accepted her failure, her imperfect, ugly cookies, makes her happier than she can express. She feels a sense of liberation, snapping the mental threads of perfectionism that have bound her. The chapter concludes with a shift in perspective to a darker setting. A figure, presumably Narcisse or an observer hostile to the Frisier family, stands by a window. He dismisses a subordinate who is delivering boring reports about the Frisier family's potential movements. He cuts off the report, stating he has already heard enough. Looking out at the sky, he complains that it is disgustingly sunny. He muses that perhaps he will go out into the garden, hoping to see something interesting, casting a shadow over the sunny disposition of the previous scenes.